Okay, we've got a pretty good number of people signed on so far, so we'll go ahead and get started. So this is for people who have used data or who are interested in using data. And I'm going to talk through how we do data coaching in the Golden Gate chapter. Um, Basically, we use data acquisition for driver development, and we do it in the track school environment. We use a classroom, kind of a common classroom. We'll have to figure out what to do if COVID's still around with the next track school. The classroom may be outside somewhere. But with a classroom, it's really easy for people to sort of share screens and talk to different coaches and for people to compare notes about different data sets. We typically do a 2-day process. We're looking at single day and half day versions for the future, but it's mostly 2 days. You work with your instructor or your coach with every session. So let's take a look at what the process looks like. There's an initial meeting before you head out on track. We'll discuss goals for the event and for your first session. This is similar to when you have an in-car instructor. Typically, they want to talk to you about, what do you want to do? What kind of car do you have? What mods do you have? Similar kind of conversation. Then you'll go out and drive. We capture both data and video. We provide the data units, although many people bring their own data unit. They may have a dash that's wired into the car. They may have the audio and video synchronized, or the audio and the data, the video and the data synchronized. There are many different systems. We have sort of really low cost sports cameras that are not synchronized with the data, unfortunately. After that session, after each session, basically we want to review the data and the video. And depending on where you are as a driver, we may emphasize the video more or the data. We'll look for progress towards whatever goals we've set. We'll look for problems and or opportunities for improvement. Then we'll set some new goals and, send the driver out again. So it's an iterative process. We go round and round through 8 sessions in a weekend. So let's talk a little bit about goals. How do we do that? We could say, don't go so slow, go faster, less brake, more throttle. We like to be more specific. We try to set 1, 2, or maybe 3 goals per session because we have a lot of sessions over the course of a weekend. It can add up to a significant number of goals. We don't want too many at once. Russ Bentley, who's a professional coach, he talks about 3 goals max. Peter Krause, another one, he likes 2 goals. So that's why I say 1, 2, maybe 3. Sometimes 1 goal is the right number of goals. We'll just, here's the one thing to work on for this session. We try to make them very concrete, and I divide them up into measurable, qualitative, and subjective. And there may be some overlap with some of these goals. And you may wonder why, in a data class, why isn't everything just measurable goals, just numbers? That's what we're collecting. Well, there's more to it than that. So as we look at measurable goals, we'll be looking at miles per hour, tenths of a G, lateral and longitudinal, but there'll be a number of different measures that we may be looking at. And we can set goals in terms of those specific numbers that your 1.1 G, let's see if you can get to 1.2 Gs. The qualitative is sort of the shapes of things. These shapes here are speed versus distance going through a corner. And this green trace is you're gonna have a very different experience in the corner compared to the red trace. So in general, what's going on down here is something we want to avoid. And so we can talk about it subjectively. I mean, qualitatively in terms of shapes. And I could give a number for the, you know, you're hitting this speed, I want you to hit that speed, but the shape can often make it more meaningful. Subjective will be things like what it feels like in the harness, whether or not you're hitting the rumble strips or the paint at the edge of the track. When your tire, when you have a softer compound tire and it goes over the paint, it makes a slightly different noise. Those kind of things can be feedback that you know, the student acting as a data system themselves can bring that information back to the classroom. So, you know, I like to give goals in terms of what it feels like in the car. For example, if someone's hitting a certain level of lateral G's in one corner, and I want them to hit that same lateral G's in another corner, I can talk about how it feels, how the pressure of your body against the seat, the side bolsters of the seat. Those are the kind of things we can talk about. So you can get an immediate measure while you're in the car as to if you're making headway. So any questions so far about any of these ideas? Okay, so the next piece is they need to be achievable. We're talking stretch goals, not unobtainium. And this goes back to the idea that you have many different sessions. So what we want to be able to do is establish a baseline. This is what you can do over and over again. We want to make incremental progress. We're looking for base hits, not swinging at the fence. If you set a goal that is far too optimistic, typically a driver is not going to be able to get there. They're going to feel bad about it. They're not going to make any headway during that session. So we really want to make these little incremental steps, and they add up a lot. But a lot of that comes back to having a baseline. This is something you know, and we want to move that whole baseline up so that you can drive that lap. When you make some progress, you can drive that lap again. It wasn't just something out of the blue. Okay, so to make it more concrete, I have a specific driver we'll talk about. I've anonymized this. This is driver 8. Driver 8 is experienced and fast, drives on the track and autocross. The car is an E30 with our compound tires. It's got some suspension mods, and it's more than your average horsepower that you might see in an E30. It's you know, more than the original motor kind of average. It's, you know, there are E30s with S54s. This is not one of those, but it's got some go. Okay, so let's switch to Race Studio Analysis. This is the tool that we use primarily. The hardware that the chapter provides are AIM silos. And most people who bring their own data acquisition equipment bring something from AIM. And so with all of these, Race Studio Analysis works. We are, you know, open to the idea of other solutions. There's some other solutions on the market right now. This is what we have the most experience with. So this is what I'm going to talk about. So one of the first things I like to do is pull up a bunch of laps. So there's a bunch of squiggly lines here. Let me simplify the display a little bit. So what I'm looking at here, if you look at the x-axis here, up and down this way, that's speed in miles per hour. And if you look at the, sorry, that's the y-axis. If you look at the x-axis here, along this way, it is distance. This is distance down the track from start-finish. Start-finish is defined as kind of a GPS reference point. So why do we use distance? So using distance, I can compare, this is the middle of turn 1. This is the middle of turn 2, and so on as we go around the racetrack. Where the speed is low, that tends to be corners. So I can compare what happened between one lap and another lap. I have the ability to use time. I rarely do that, but I can use time versus distance in theory. You know, these laps are close enough in time that they're all 2:03s. So you can see they spread out a little bit. And if you have a big difference in time, all of my peaks and valleys start to drift apart, especially later in the lap. So I try to keep that in time. So anyway, now that we're looking at this view here, I like to start with this view because I can get a general overview of what's going on with the driver. I pull up a whole bunch of laps and take a look at a bunch of laps all at the same time. I'm not going to be able to get into any kind of detail because there's so much stuff on the screen, but I can get some trends. And I see here a lot of variation in turn 1. Let me pull up this little diagram here so you can see where I am in the track. So if I click on this cursor here on the track map moves with it. So that's turn 1. I see, you know, I'm looking at 4 miles, 4 or 5, even 7 miles per hour difference there. I see a bunch of difference in turn 2. There's a lot of variation going on here. Even turn 8, there's some differences. Some of this can be due to traffic, and some of it is the driver trying different things. And, you know, this driver reported they're trying a bunch of different things and trying to see what feels good and you know, what works best. So there's some of that going on, but what I would like to see before we start experimenting is, you know, say, take a look at this is a lot tidier. There's still some variation, but I like to see something fairly tidy, and then you make a change, right? If every lap is a little different, it's really hard to sort of separate out what change did you make that gives me a meaningful difference. You know, I see the most consistency here in turn 14, 15. I put the cursor here and my track map disappeared. Show track map. Here I am in 14, 15. There's a lot of consistency here. So if I said, let's try a different line, a different brake point, a different throttle application, then it'd be more clear to me what's going on. Whereas if I go to turn 1 and, you know, each lap is a little different, what am I changing? Okay, so that would be my first bit of advice to this driver is, you know, this driver is putting down some fast laps. All of these are 203s or thereabouts in an E30 Thunderhill with a bypass. That's a pretty good pace. First, a little note on timing. We don't really record timing and we don't put up timesheets on the wall, but we do end up talking about minutes and seconds and tenths and miles per hour and so on in that data classroom, just to give us a handle to work with. But anyway, these laps all are about the same time, but there's a lot of difference between them. I would like to see the driver slow down maybe 5%, slow down to say a 205, 206, give me the exact same lap 4 times in a row. And then we'll start changing some stuff. And then the ultimate performance hopefully will be better. But right now I'm working on quicksand. So I need that baseline, that solid foundation to work on. Okay, so let me sort of clear out some of the clutter. Here I've got a couple laps to look at. And I'm going to pull up more channels. This is just speed versus distance. And I have some user profiles that are sort of predefined screens of what's visible on the screen, which can be helpful to me to be able to quickly pop around to different views. I want to take a look at the braking zone here for turn 14. My map disappeared again. Pull this up again. So here I put the cursor here. This is a braking zone because I see my speed plummeting dramatically from about 110 to what, around low 50s. And here I can see my cursor right here. There I am right in the middle of the braking zone for turn 14. So what do I see here on this second trace? This trace right here is what I call GPS longitudinal acceleration. So this is a longitudinal acceleration calculation that's done from GPS data. And it tells me about braking and throttle and anything that speeds up and slows down the car. And I see this big dip right here. I don't like that dip. We can zoom in to that little section there, get a better sense of what's going on. And this happens with a lot of laps. And again, I want to just narrow down to a couple of laps. So the negative, this is 0 right here. That mark right there is 0. This is negative G, so that's braking. And then I see the braking decrease, and then the braking increase, and then the braking decreases again. I don't really like that. Does anybody have an idea of what the driver might be doing to cause that to happen?
Downshift.
Exactly. So the driver's doing a heel toe downshift, and as the driver is blipping the throttle, the pressure on the brake pedal varies. So let me simplify this down further. I'm just going to look at one lap. I have another view here that I really like. It's a GPS view. This is the trace collected from the actual GPS data that shows where the car is going. And I have the option of mapping something onto the track. Heat map is a term that's used often. I'm looking at GPS longitudinal acceleration as the car goes around the track. The way they map it, blue is heavy braking here, and red is acceleration. So what you see, and here's a scale down here in the bottom right, that's about 400 feet. So if I take my little marker over, say, you pick a, I have black, that's not a good color. Over a distance, roughly about 400 feet, you can see squeezing the brake, heavy braking, less heavy braking, more heavier braking. And then here's a release coming down into, and it's around neutral throttle, somewhere around here. So I could potentially compress the braking zone if I didn't have this big dip right here. So I would like the driver to focus on how they do the downshift, and potentially, there are a couple different schools of thought on this. You go back to measures graph. I like to see the downshift happen later, and and you can actually see right here this little decrease in braking pressure shows up here in the slope, right? I've got heavy braking, and now the slope is not as steep, and then the slope is steeper. So this is also showing up in the attitude of the car. The weight's moving forward and coming back a little and going forward a little bit. So there are many different issues that are resulting from this. I like to see the downshift relatively late because you are in the process of releasing the brake anyway. Some people want to get it done right away. I like waiting till you're in the process of releasing the brake. The blip doesn't have to be as big because your RPM is going to be lower. So I would like to see a general cleanup of this, and that could be part of the whole process of slow down, be more consistent, is to really nail this and be super consistent about that braking. And turn 14 is a great place to work on that. If we look, let me zoom out to the whole lap again. Zooming out to the whole lap. I see, a little hint of it here. I see a little hint of it here, a little hint of it here. This is the worst one. That might be a good place to start. Work on the worst one, and hopefully there'll be a spillover effect and the driver will work on that consistent pressure with rocking their foot over to blip the throttle. So that's kind of the second thing. If we go back, let's see, let's take a look at another thing. I have a capability called split time analysis. When I have a huge number of laps to look at, you go back to my test database and pull up. Some of these sessions were short. This one's longer than what you're typically going to get in a HPDE, but I got 24 laps. Some of the bad laps, you see X's on them. I got rid of them by disabling them. That makes the split time analysis work better. So here I've got a large number of laps to look at, and I can put them all up on the screen and look at the squiggly lines. It starts to become a challenge to extract out the gems, the really good stuff. With a split report, I can take a look, and the numbers highlighted in blue are my fastest segments around the racetrack. I've divided this track up into 8 segments. I've got a total of eight segments through here. What are those segments? So I made, I haven't saved this one. I better be careful. A typical track map. Let's look at Button Willow for comparison. Okay, here's a Thunderhill track map. Every time you turn the steering wheel or straighten the steering wheel, it creates a segment. And these segments are so short, they're not necessarily realistic. So if you got a great segment time in this little blue segment right here, you may think, oh, I want to do that. Well, maybe you went flying off into the runoff area because you did a terrible mistake here. It looked fast for a moment. So I try to make more realistic segments. And if we look at the map, I created much longer segments. So let me zoom into this a little bit so you can see this better. So basically, I want my segments to start and end where the driver tends not to be doing much that's changing. So there's my start finish. It's actually at the tower. And then this right here, I am still full throttle before I hit the brakes for turn 2 most of the time. So once I capture what's going on here in this first segment here, I get a better, more realistic impression of what I can do with the car than if I had some tiny little artificial segment. So I've broken it up into a total of 8 segments here. And one segment that we're going to pay attention to is the segment that contains turn 8. It's got made up numbers here for turn numbers, which don't mean anything. This is turn 8 at Thunderhill. It's a very fast, challenging corner. So if I look at that segment, something didn't go quite right in my segment analysis. This is really my fastest run through here. Should be highlighted in blue. I got a 7.070 through that segment, which is faster than this. Oh, maybe it shows up. Yeah, for some reason it did not show up. So let me look at lap 18 and see what I have going on there. So go back to my measures graph. I'm going to turn on the per lap color. So my lap 18 here is going to be in this magenta color. And we can see if we zoom in, I've got a very high minimum speed, and that carries on through to the exit. And if I look here, you can see my longitudinal G's are relatively low. If I add in some more laps, very often I have lateral G's that are much bigger. This one, there must have been traffic there, it's 0.92, but 0.48, I see that a lot. I have the option to drill in deeper with this car. Here I'm looking at the GPS longitudinal acceleration, but I do have the option let's see. With this car, the car is instrumented with throttle and brake. So I can take a look at what's going on through here. So the top trace is my speed versus distance. The middle trace here is brake pressure. So instead of looking at the GPS longitudinal acceleration and trying to guess what's going on with the brakes, I can get a pretty good impression, but it's better to have this if it's available. And then the bottom trace is throttle. So I can take a look at what's going on through here in that lap 18 is still looking pretty good. I've got a high minimum speed. The car is 98 miles per hour through there at the minimum speed. There's a lap that's going a little bit faster, going 101 miles per hour. That's this red one. But you can see that one didn't work out very well. The driver got a little overconfident and had to brake pretty hard and came out of the corner slow. Well, not brake hard, but get out of the throttle, delay the throttle. So that's looking pretty good. So what's going on with that? Why is that one different? So first thing to look at is a number of these laps I'm using a little bit of brake pressure. So, and that shows up in the slope here. The application of the brake is going to cause me to lose speed much more quickly than if I just lift out of the throttle. So I've got to lift out of the throttle gives me more balance to the car because I'm not moving the weight onto the nose of the car. And when I've got a 100-mile-per-hour corner, I don't necessarily want to be throwing the weight of the car around. I want to have gentle weight transfer so the car is balanced as possible. So as I look at that, let me get rid of some of these other data channels and just narrow it down. With that, all I have is a lift, no brake going into that corner. Now, with many cars and many drivers, that's not advisable. But for this car and this driver, a lift is appropriate. For cars that do need to brake, this sort of a light brake pressure here is going to make sense. You can see, you know, I'm using much less brake pedal than here in turn 9. I'm using a lot of brake pedal because I got to lose a lot of speed. So the lower brake pressure or a lift keeps the car balanced. Now I see something that I don't like, which is this is coming down and then it goes back up and then it goes down again. So again, that's weight transfer going on that I want to avoid. So this 98 miles per hour could potentially be higher if we smooth that out a little bit. We can go down here and look at the throttle and get a sense for what's going on. We see that initial throttle comes up to, I'm seeing 33% of throttle almost immediately. Then the throttle comes back down to, you know, more moderate 15, 16%. So my piece of advice to this driver driving this particular car would be use the no brake approach. The lift seems to be working for you, but that throttle tip in, you need to slow that down. You need to slow down that throttle tip in. It'll balance the car better, and you'll avoid this sort of porpoising of the car where the weight's moving forward and backward. So, so we started off with saying 1, 2, or 3 goals. We've got 3. I could spend more time looking at this data and I could find more stuff. There was some interesting stuff going on in turn 1. There was one lap that looked much quicker than the others, but this is a fairly full plate of goals. And then, we can come back and look at the rest of the driving later. So let me go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so what I like to do when I give somebody goals is I like to give them a little Post-it note, approximately 3x3 Post-it note, and I put their goals down on it. I hand it to them. They can take it away. And I try to create different ways to describe the goal depending on what the goal is. So the first one that we talked about, slow down 5%. I want the driver to repeat the same lap over and over and over again. This gives me a baseline, right? This driver found 12 different ways to do a 203. Show me one way to do a 205 or 206, something like that. And then we can move forward from there and potentially have higher performance. But when I got 12 different ways to do a 203, I got a lot of variations to sort through. I want to simplify that process. The other, we saw this in a lot of laps in a lot of different corners, the brake pressure profile. Brake pressure comes up, there's a dip, goes back up again for the heel toe. The shape that I like to see here is a quick squeeze and then almost immediately start releasing pressure. And most corners, the release is going to take much more time than the initial application. What you're doing here is you're letting the nose of the car come up slowly. If you have a quick release, the front nose of the car is going to want to come up, taking away traction right when you need to turn the car. A lot of times people will say, well, my car is understeering. Well, you made the car understeer by your use of the pedals. So I would give the driver this advice: get rid of this shape. Try to make sure you're doing this kind of a shape. And then turn 8, finally, lift, not brake. That seems, for this car, this driver, that seems like a good approach. For many people that use the brake, I would talk about use a light brake. This sort of brake pressure profile would be, you know, sort of a low, long brake to keep the car balanced. So focus on balance and momentum through this type of corner. And I'd like to see a much slower throttle tip in. That initial tip in as the foot touches the throttle and starts to squeeze in, go to 15%, not 30%. And that should smooth out that corner, and min speed may move up a little bit. And that pays all the way down to turn 9.